smoke. Thick, rich, mouth-watering smoke curled into the air, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of slow-cooked meat, charred just right at the edges, kissed by flame, bathed in seasoning that had taken generations to perfect. The kind of smoke that didn't just drift. It wrapped itself around you, grabbed hold of your soul, and whispered in your ear that you needed to sit down and have a plate, right now. Somewhere on the lunar surface, a chunky propane smoker hissed as a pitmaster in a grease-stained apron casually flipped a slab of ribs. A Midwestern dad, arms crossed, nodded approvingly at the grill marks on a row of thick, seared steaks. In the distance, someone cracked open a cold beer, and the sound of Sweet Home Alabama playing through a tinny Bluetooth speaker echoed softly across the vast emptiness of space. This was humanity's final stand. At least that's what the Galactic Senate had thought. They had expected fear, desperation, the usual pathetic scrambling of an underdeveloped species realizing too late that it had drawn the attention of a power far beyond its comprehension. They had not expected this. Supreme Strategist, one of the reptilian officers whispered, staring at the live feed from the moon's surface, his claws twitching at his console. Our instruments confirm high concentrations of carbon compounds, elevated heat signatures, extensive use of open flame. Voktal, High Chancellor of the Galactic Senate's Imperial Armada, the Butcher of the Outer Rim, narrowed his slitted eyes. His mandibles twitched. What are they doing? His officers hesitated, struggling to find the appropriate words to describe what they were witnessing. Finally, one of the intelligence analysts, a pale-skinned, multi-eyed Arctari, gulped and said in a hushed, almost reverent tone, "Sir, I believe they are cooking." Silence fell over the war room of the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. This was not possible. This was a species on the brink of extermination. Humanity had been given 48 hours to surrender. Instead, they had responded by rolling out charcoal grills and marinating meat. This was not war. This was not resistance. This was absolute insanity. Voktal's claws tightened around the armrest of his command chair. "This is mockery," he growled, his deep voice rattling the polished walls of the command deck. "They dare to mock us." More whispers rippled through the ranks. Mockery? Or something else? The alien officers shifted uncomfortably, their noses twitching at the faintest trace of the aroma leaking through their filtration systems. Some, despite themselves, licked their lips. Voktal refused to be shaken. "Very well," he sneered, rising to his full imposing height. "They wish to stall. Let them have their charade. We will meet them in their chosen battleground." He turned to his adjutant. "Send word. We land on the moon in 1 hour. This farce ends today." But somewhere, buried deep beneath centuries of warforged instinct, something primal stirred in him, something hungry. The landing craft touched down in a perfect synchronized maneuver, metallic limbs hissing as they settled onto the barren gray surface of Earth's moon. The Galactic Senate's war delegation stepped forward in ceremonial precision, draped in imperial robes of shimmering nanoweave, exoskeletal armor gleaming under the harsh lunar light. This was not a mere meeting. It was a display, a reminder that the galaxy was ordered, civilized, and governed by beings far superior to the chaotic, irrational creatures known as humans. And yet, the moment the airlocks hissed open, the smell hit them. A thick, unfathomably rich aroma, smoky and deep, wrapped around them like a predator. It slithered past filtration masks, bypassed air purification units, and wormed its way directly into the primal centers of their alien brains. Somewhere in the ranks of disciplined warriors, a reptilian officer shuddered. What is that?" one of the Senate officials rasped, voice thick with unease. A flurry of scanning devices lit up, but the readings were impossible. Elevated carbon levels, large-scale heat sources, a disturbing amount of sodium. Voktal stepped forward, his war-trained nerves steel-clad against whatever deception the humans had arranged. His eyes locked onto the battlefield before him. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. There were no defensive barriers, no war mechs, no desperate displays of military bravado. Instead, a fleet of food trucks, lawn chairs arranged in casual semicircles around open flame pit grills, humans in cargo shorts and sunglasses, flipping unidentifiable slabs of meat over glowing embers. The rhythmic sizzle of fat meeting fire, the low, slow churning of wood smoke curling into the void. A large banner had been planted in the dust. It flapped defiantly in the moon's gravity, covered in bold red letters. Welcome to the Galactic Peace Summit and Smokehouse Showdown. Voktal stood frozen, mandibles slightly parted, fists clenched. What was this? A human delegation approached. Leading them was a broad-shouldered Texan, boots dusted with moon soil, cowboy hat tipped at an easy angle. His apron, stained from years of service, bore the words, "Kiss the Cook." Beside him, a Cajun chef twirled a wooden spoon like a baton, cigar clamped between his teeth. A Midwestern dad adjusted his socks inside his sandals, nodded to himself, and muttered, "Yep, that's about right." And behind them, looking mildly exasperated but resigned to the insanity, stood a 4-star U.S. general. The Texan grinned like a man who had already won the war. "Y'all hungry?" Voktal saw something flash in the human's eyes. Not fear, not desperation. It was confidence. He felt the impossible pull of curiosity clawing at the edge of his mind. His secondary hearts pounded. Somewhere deep in his core, something very, very dangerous began to happen. He was getting hungry. The first bite was an accident. A Xerak warlord, standing rigid behind Voktal, had been caught off guard when a passing human offered him a plate without so much as a second thought. The alien, battle-hardened and disciplined, had reached out purely out of reflex, taking the still steaming slab of brisket in his clawed hands before his tactical brain could object. Then, the heat of it seeped into his fingertips. Then, the smell hit him like a plasma blast to the chest. Then, his mandibles twitched, his secondary hearts thrummed, and before he realized what was happening, his body betrayed him. He took a bite. Silence. The war delegation froze. Every alien warrior, every bureaucrat, every high-ranking strategist who had trained for centuries in the art of war now watched, aghast, as one of their own stood there, utterly motionless. The warlord's eyes widened. His claws trembled. His secondary eyelids fluttered in what could only be described as a moment of absolute, unfiltered bliss. A sound rumbled in his chest, deep, guttural, almost primal. It was a sound his species only made when experiencing extreme pleasure. Voktal whipped around in horror. "General, stand down! You are being compromised!" The warlord ignored him. He did not care, because right now, nothing else mattered. The meat was smoky, tender, dripping with a sauce so complex, so rich in flavor, that his highly evolved mind struggled to categorize it. There was salt, yes. Smoke, yes. But something deeper, something sweet and tangy. Something that coated his very soul and whispered the secrets of the cosmos into his senses. The human standing next to him patted him on the back. "Hits different, don't it?" The warlord shuddered. His sword clattered to the ground. His eyes welled with tears. Voktal felt his authority cracking beneath his feet. "Control yourselves," he snarled, whirling toward his officers. But it was too late. Another alien grabbed a plate, then another and another. Plates piled high with ribs, cornbread, coleslaw, loaded baked potatoes. The delegation collapsed into absolute chaos. A Drelac senator, a gelatinous being of shifting hues, absorbed an entire rack of ribs into its core and turned an iridescent gold, quivering in what could only be described as unholy rapture. A reptilian warrior, previously a staunch believer in the cause, dropped to his knees, clutching a smoked turkey leg like it was a religious artifact. Voktal stared, frozen in abject horror. His entire military strategy undone in seconds. The Texan pitmaster, watching it all unfold, leaned in toward the U.S. general, smirking. "How long before they beg for the sauce?" 2 minutes, the general muttered. Bet. Voktal was losing control, not just of his troops, not just of the war, but of reality itself. This was not how invasions were supposed to go. There should have been battalions marching, bombardments commencing, the subjugation of a lesser species beneath the unbreakable might of the Galactic Senate. Instead, the smoke curled in lazy, intoxicating spirals. The sound of meat sizzling over fire drowned out the silence of the void. And his elite war delegation, the finest minds, the greatest tacticians, the most disciplined soldiers, had become absolute slaves to their own taste buds. Voktal whirled, mandibles clicking, his fury boiling over. "You fools!" he roared, glaring at his once proud generals, now hunched over disposable plates, licking their claws and making noises unbefitting warriors. "You are the finest military minds of the Zirak Dominion. You have conquered entire star systems. And now you are... He pointed a trembling claw at a high-ranking Arctari diplomat, who was currently dunking a smoked rib into a dish of sauce, eyes rolling back in absolute bliss. "You are eating with your hands. Have you no shame?" The diplomat, mouth full, looked up, unbothered. "It's called finger food, buddy. You wouldn't get it." Voktal's rage skyrocketed. Enough. Enough. He could still salvage this. A single decisive blow, a statement that would shatter the human illusion of power and put them back in their place. He spun on his heel, grabbing the ceremonial warblade at his side. He raised it high, preparing to make an example of the nearest human, And then, a stake flew directly into his mouth. It happened too fast. He didn't have time to react. One moment he was fully prepared to commit an act of brutal, decisive warfare, and the next, a perfectly seasoned, medium-rare piece of meat had landed squarely between his mandibles. The taste exploded in his mouth. His body locked up, his four lungs spasmed. His vision went dark. And for the first time in his long, blood-stained career, Supreme High Strategist Voktal, the Butcher of the Outer Rim, the Grand Minister of War, the unyielding fist of the Galactic Senate, fell to his knees. The delegation watched in stunned silence. The human who had thrown the stake, a Midwestern dad in cargo shorts, nodded in approval. "Nice catch, big guy," he said, grinning. Voktal couldn't speak. He could barely breathe. The steak melted in his mouth, juices flooding his senses, the combination of spices and char sending his highly evolved taste receptors into complete and utter shock. Something inside him broke. His warrior instincts, his strategic mind, his hatred for this backwater species, all of it. Because at that moment, there was no war, no politics, no intergalactic supremacy. There was only the stake. Voktal sat motionless, the weight of defeat pressing down on him harder than any gravity he had ever encountered. But was it defeat? The stake was gone. Only the memory of it remained, seared into his mind like a brand. The charred crust, the juices that had defied the laws of physics with their sheer perfection, the strange but undeniable balance of fire and fat, salt and smoke. It was not just a meal. It was a weapon, a force greater than any fleet, any armada, any orbital strike he could have unleashed upon this cursed planet. His mandibles twitched, his secondary hearts thrummed erratically. There had never been a war like this before. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Across the moon's surface, alien dignitaries once poised for conquest were now hunched over paper plates, gnawing at ribs with the kind of desperate hunger that transcended culture, language, or species. A Zirak general, a creature Voktal had once seen strangle an enemy combatant with his bare claws, was currently weeping into a plate of pulled pork. A delegation of Arctari mathematicians were huddled in a circle, trying to derive a formula that could explain how cornbread could possibly be so soft, yet so structured. The Drelax senator had not stopped vibrating since consuming an entire smoked turkey leg. Voktal's claws flexed. He had to say something. Anything. The Texan pitmaster leaned forward, arms crossed, grinning like a man who had just won a war without firing a single shot. "So, y'all ready to talk terms?" Voktal's jaw clenched. He was a warrior. He was a leader. He had been forged in battle, had crushed planets beneath his boots, had turned civilizations into cautionary tales. And yet, how? He rasped, barely above a whisper. The pitmaster tilted his head. How what? Voktal's voice trembled. He despised it. How do you get the bark so crisp, while keeping the interior so... His throat closed up. He could barely say the word. Tender? The Texan's grin widened. He clapped a hand onto the Supreme Strategist's armored shoulder, a bold move considering no one in the galaxy had ever dared to touch Voktal without losing a limb. Low and slow, partner, he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the universe. Low and slow. Voktal stared ahead, seeing not an enemy, not a defeated foe, but a master of an art so ancient, so powerful, that no empire could ever hope to destroy it. He exhaled sharply, rising to his feet. We will negotiate. The humans cheered. Beer cans cracked open. The Bluetooth speaker blared a triumphant electric guitar riff. The Galactic Senate's greatest warlord had surrendered to barbecue. And that, my friends, is another testament to humanity's unrivaled ingenuity. If you enjoyed this story, smash that like button. It fuels the algorithm and lets me know you want more. Drop a comment below with your favorite moment. And of course, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join us for the next story. See you in the next one. Stay awesome, stay defiant, and as always, humanity rules.